Desh, it's a pleasure, like always, to welcome you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I co-chair a National Council for Innovation Entrepreneurship, along with Steve Case, who's a co-founder of AOL, and Mary Sue Coleman, who is the president of University of Michigan. And what we're looking at is how can entrepreneurship have a bigger impact on the economy. So in the United States, roughly 500,000 new companies get started every year. And consistently over the last 15 years, they've generated 4 million new jobs. And big companies are losing jobs, and it's the young companies that start the jobs. So to really get the economy going and to maintain the unemployment rate at a lower level, we have to find a way to take that 4 million up to 6 and 8 and 10 and so on over the course of the next 25 years. And so it's really two things. What can we do to start more companies going? And more than that, what can we do to speed them up? So far, on an average, it takes about 20 years to build a company with a revenue of about $1 billion. So what we identify is that there's 4 things that you need to actually do good companies. Number 1, you need good ideas, you need good entrepreneurs, you need good mentors, and you need access to capital. So we have taken initiatives in all the 4 elements to see how we can help out. So in terms of ideas, United States spends about $150 billion a year. And so a lot of the work that we did at the Deshpande Center at MIT and so on has now become a model for NSF. NIH is looking at it. And so I think we're trying to sort of figure out how that $150 billion that we spend in generating ideas can have a bigger social impact and economic impact. So that will fuel all the new ideas that we need to get new companies going. Entrepreneurship, we are already number 1 in the world, but we need to celebrate more. So in fact, Steve Case led the effort called Startup America. And we did a 10-city tour. We celebrated entrepreneurship and highlighted entrepreneurship and so on. So that went pretty good. Mentorship, I think it's a national asset. I mean, not too many countries have this tradition of startups and people becoming successful and giving back. You're very familiar with TIE, but that does not need to be restricted just to the Indus entrepreneurs. It can be all across all the entrepreneurs in US. And finally, access to capital. That's the committee that I personally led, and I was very proud that it was one of the few bills that both Democrats and Republicans signed up, and we passed a thing called the Jobs Act, which we actually, I was there in Rose Garden when Obama signed the bill and everything else. So I was very proud of that. So I think the idea is to how do you get more ideas going, and how do you generate more jobs with it. United States is still number 1. There's absolutely no question about that. But for the last 25 years, it's been a nice thing to have. If you look at the next 25 years, it's the only thing to have, because in the global economy, because of the standard of living is so high here, we have to do things that are more creative, more innovative to actually maintain the standard of living. And so we have to find an innovation economy where we fund innovation creates impact, and that impact can fund even more innovation and so on. So we have to find that virtuous cycle within the economy, and that's what the council is trying to do.
So Desh, when you look at the government's role in empowering entrepreneurship, especially in this country, it's less than half of appreciation and more than half of saying government doesn't always do a good job. If you look at developing economies like India or South America, their government's support is absolutely required, because the talent pool is not great for entrepreneurship. There's a lot of learning and knowledge base that needs to be built along with the capital and the policy impetus. How do you think you as government plays a role, which is a positive role to influence and empower the entrepreneurial ecosystem?
Well, I think it's really two things. When I talk to the entrepreneurs, I say, don't worry about the ecosystem. Entrepreneurship is all about having a conviction, having a passion, overcoming hurdles. Doesn't matter what the hurdles are. You just have to do it. You don't worry about things that you don't control. So you have to bulldoze through those hurdles. But if you're a policymaker, you want to reduce those frictions, you want to reduce those hurdles so that more people can do those things. And so access to capital, for example, is a very important thing. I think where government can make a mistake is to invest millions of dollars into companies themselves. They should not be in the game of picking winners and losers, but they should be in the game of facilitating more and more people playing the game. They can also reduce the regulatory hurdles. For example, Sarbanes-Oxley and a lot of these kinds of regulations on a small company. I mean, all those regulations are set so that you don't have a big systemic failure. Little companies cannot cause systemic failure. And so I think you have to have the right regulations so that you don't put out huge hurdles in terms of growth of the companies. So regulatory wise, I think government can do quite a bit. When they provide access to capital, they can provide a lot of incentives, tax incentives, they can co-invest and so on. But the only thing is they should not be in the game of picking winners and losers. The country in the United States, I mean, we have a lot of angel investors, we have a lot of venture capitalists. Right. They're all very capable people. In spite of all that expertise, I don't think any venture capitalist can say, this is absolutely going to be the winner, right? And so it's very hard to pick who wins and who loses. But what the government can do is to make sure that there's an ecosystem where a lot of people play the game.
Yeah. Another important role that US has always played throughout its history is trying to empower the global citizenship through various initiatives. Lately, it's been trying to focus on entrepreneurship and the spread of entrepreneurship as a good tool of diplomacy. Emerging economies, throughout the world, including Asia and the Middle East, are looking for this. So the innovation and the funding part of it is where I think they need to correct their system. Where do you think US has a role to play, especially as a tool of diplomacy to spread entrepreneurship?
Well, I think the US can do quite a bit in terms of spreading that entrepreneurial culture. So what's an entrepreneurial culture? There's a lot of problems in the world. So the first stage is to actually be able to see the problems. The second piece is to actually get passionate about a problem and somehow find a solution to it. So when the problems exist in this world because they're deadlocked, you can't do anything about it because of this, because of corruption, because of no lack of resources, whatever. But the role of the entrepreneur is to untangle that knot and somehow solve the problem. When a person solves that problem, it doesn't matter whether the problem is big or small, it's a very empowering experience. And when people experience that, they won't go back. They won't go back to the mode of behavior where you just constantly sit there and complain about the problems. Because people who complain about the problems somehow feel like they just don't have any power. They have no control, and so they just have to sit there and complain. And so I'm a big believer, and in fact that's a big part of the program that we do in India, where every student, on the back of his t-shirt, there's a thing that says, problems start with they, solutions start with I, right? And when you give that power to people, people actually really get excited when they see a problem, as opposed to sit back and complain about it. And in terms of policies, I think people have failed in terms of being able to sit in some central place, whether it's Delhi or Washington or Istanbul or wherever, and trying to come up with solutions for the whole country and then put billions of dollars behind it. So I'm a big believer that we need to do policy by proof of concept. What does that mean? That means, we have, let's say Washington, we have people in Washington, Brookings guys, all these guys are very, very smart guys. But they have no conviction, they have no sense of reality. And so they can probably fit a curve to any data and they can convince you it's a great solution because they're very smart. Entrepreneurs, on the other hand, don't have a concept of policy. They're very sure. If you say, how should I solve this problem? You say, of course you should do like this. They don't have a concept of policy because policy just means that it's good for many, not it solves everything. So if you experiment and find that something works in one place, and that could be through philanthropic dollars, could be through government aid or whatever, then let's duplicate it in 2 places, and then 4, and maybe 8. At some point, it just becomes obvious. Everybody says, of course that thing works. When we know that that thing works, then you need a policy to scale that solution across the whole thing. And what this global entrepreneurship does is it allows those countries to solve those problems by this idea of policy by proof of concept.
Well, let's take the example of India. For the better part of the last decade and a half, people have been trying to empower the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Our culture is very different. We come from mostly middle class, education background. Our careers are geared so that we could lead a better life. Those who are from the business community are focused on their business, small, medium, large. So the concept of entrepreneurship isn't yet taken hold when you talk about innovation. You're trying to create a product or service which is of unique benefit to your consumers, and then you share your wealth and your stake with other stakeholders in the organization. When the investors went there, VCs, they were not investing at the early stage or the mid stage. They were always focusing because it was ROI problem. But lately, that is taking shape. So when you go, and you go often, how do you see that evolving?
Well, I think it's all innovation and entrepreneurship is contextual. So the US VCs cannot take the US model and take it there and say it's going to work, and if it doesn't work, call it a failure. I think entrepreneurship is very much alive and well. And as you go up the ladder, you'll see more and more people now who are innovating and doing good things. I mean, you have some successes on the high end of the chain, but a lot of successes where people are innovating things for the local markets. Because I think innovation happens better when the innovator lives with the problem. But those models sometimes may lend to venture capital, sometimes may not. A lot of them can bootstrap, and maybe they need growth capital when they get to a certain size and so on. So I think the models may be different, but I see entrepreneurship very much alive and kicking in India.
Again, staying on the India subject, half the people who are successful in a diaspora from here have given up on India. Half are still gung-ho about the opportunities provided. So if you take a role model, people want to be a Narayan Murthy or a Ratan Tata. If you take role models here, you're among the role models here as trailblazers. How do you think is a better way to inspire the young entrepreneurs? Because inspiration is only so much, but when rubber meets the road, there is a lot of different challenges. So I think there are some lessons that you can provide right from the government down to the organizations and the associations who are going to empower the ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, if you want to be a good entrepreneur, as they say, you have to be where the puck is going to be, not where it's been. So you cannot just start another services company and be successful now. And the country has gone through those stages. So when the country started this services business, it wasn't clear at all that it was going to be successful, right? And so they have made that successful. But what the service industry has done is it's shown that people are very capable of tackling technology. But that technology has primarily solved problems of other companies, other countries, and so on. So the next wave of opportunity is to take that capability, the technology capability, and to solve your own problems, people's problems. And that's going to lead to a lot of opportunity for new products and services and everything else right within the country. But they will have a very different margin profile, they will have a very different cost structure and so on. And so I think that's where the opportunity is, and it's going to happen. And so I think people need to latch on to that next wave of opportunity where people are looking at the needs within India, because the Indian economy is growing quite a bit, people have disposable income. And they need to start designing products and services, whether it's education or healthcare or tourism or just internet, getting everything organized so that the logistics are better. I think there's lots of opportunities that people are going to be very successful.
It comes to inspiration for the aspiring entrepreneurs. The initial inspiration is Narayan Murthy took his company global. Deshpande sold his first company just shy of $4 billion. So money is the big attraction, and the opportunities that money brings with it. But when they look at, again, I'm keep taking both examples because you represent a sheer example of humility in the face of such insurmountable successes. So I see that a lot more here in US, especially in Silicon Valley, in spite of what other people say. I don't see it as much in UK or other big metropolis, which are traditional industry-driven millionaires or billionaires. How do you think, the value system could be instilled in the youngsters that material success means only so much?
Well, I think it's just a question of people getting a taste of it. It just comes back to a question of, I don't think entrepreneurs are going to be successful if they start by saying, I'm going to work really hard for 2, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, become rich and happily live ever after. Some people may get lucky, in the bubble days and so on. You get lucky and you suddenly get a huge valuation and you get out. But that's luck. And so the only way you're going to be successful is if you are really focused on your conviction and your desire to make the difference. And it may take 2 years, may take 20 years, may take 50 years. And so all the good entrepreneurs actually follow that path. And even after you're successful, it's not the end of the road. I don't know if anybody can ever be successful enough that they can just happily live ever after. You have to keep reinventing yourself, right? And reinvention means you need new ideas. You have to get up in the morning and be excited about something, which also means that it may fail. And so ability to reinvent and do new things and do all that with the very possible future of failure, I think is what makes people humble, because now you're still fighting a battle. It's not like your battle is over and you won everything. And if you did that, to me, that's the end of life. I mean, if you get to the point where you say, I've done everything I need to do, it's not a very fun thing to be. And so I think humility comes from just the taste of reinventing yourself.
Lately, there has been emphasis amongst the most successful business leaders around the world, especially in this country, to give back and make a difference. So Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, all the way down. You have been a big proponent of this concept. You have took the initiative to give back so much through MIT. It will be helpful for us to understand if you share what goes into the foundation that you started at MIT.
Well, I think the entrepreneurs essentially like to make a difference. You can make a difference in lots of different ways. You can make it through a product, through a service, through philanthropy. And so I joined the MIT board in year 2000. So I didn't go to MIT, so I had no reason to actually give money to MIT. And so our gift to MIT was really a gift for Massachusetts, gift for US, and hopefully a gift for the world. And what we're trying to do was when I came from India and we moved to Boston in 1984, I was just an aspiring entrepreneur. And fortunately, I had enough opportunities to actually experience some of that entrepreneurship. And that's fantastic, right? And so we wanted to see if there's a way we can create more of those opportunities for more entrepreneurs. Now, when we look back, a lot of the companies that we started in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the core technology came from Bell Labs. But by year 2000, the Bell Labs is gone, primarily because there were no more monopolies. And so the center of gravity for idea generation had squarely moved back to universities. And the US taxpayers spend about $50 billion a year in university research and about $100 billion in Fed labs. And so the question is, how do you make this $50 billion create more opportunities for entrepreneurs? And MIT, Stanford, Caltech are already very good in this globally, but could they be doing better? So we gave $20 million and set up this Deshpande Center for Technological Innovation to see if people could have more impact. And what it has accomplished in the last 10 years has been very heartwarming. And the idea is pretty simple. I mean, either people can come up with the whole idea, patent the technology, and then try to look for applications, or if they have a desire for impact, they can start get connected to the marketplace, to the real world upfront. And so as they navigate through the innovation, it's more likely that when they finish the idea, it's more likely to have a pull in the marketplace. And so all the ideas that we funded, about almost a third of them have become companies, and now that's become a national model. A lot of the universities have embraced that same process. It's become a part of NSF, NIH is looking at it, and so very, very satisfied with the fact that we got that initiative going.
And finally, the other philanthropy causes you do, most importantly, the initiative you took for Akshay Patra. It is an old saying, as we all know, feed a fish, you're feeding for a day, teach him how to fish, you're feeding for life. The poorest of the poor in India, the kids, as you mentioned earlier, they don't go to school because they have to go and eke out a living. And you provide them a warm meal, that probably is enough draw incentive for them to come to school. Now that it has grown so big, wanting to share with us the progress of Akshay Patra.
Okay, so let me tell you how we got to Akshay Patra. We all understand the power of innovation entrepreneurship in the high end of the model. So we have the MIT, we have Mass Challenge, we're doing a whole bunch of stuff in Massachusetts, but it essentially helps MIT, Harvard, Boston University, all the top maybe 5-10% of the population. So about 8 years ago we said, well, can we bring the same level of energy, the innovation entrepreneurship, to the bottom 20% of the population? So we started a program called Social Innovation Sandbox in India. It's based to the north of Bangalore, halfway between Bangalore and Mumbai, a place called Hubli Dharwar. And what we do is we took about 5 districts and we do a lot of the work right inside that area, because for innovation you have to create a critical mass of activity like Silicon Valley or Boston. And so we're working with about 50 of these organizations, and Akshay Patra is one of them. And so we do these programs the same way you do a company. So what does Akshay Patra do? Akshay Patra says, hey, a lot of the kids in India come hungry to school. What can we do to solve this problem? So they said, well, maybe we'll use advanced engineering, supply chain, procurement, accounting, logistics, maybe solve the problem. So they built a kitchen in the Sandbox in Hubli, which makes 185,000 meals a day, 12 cents a meal, and they serve those meals in government schools as a hot midday meal. It's local cuisine, local produce, food that children really love. It's all optimized so that it's only 12 cents a meal. So $30 feeds a child for the whole year. And the government actually gives us the $15 that are spent otherwise. And so that got perfected. And once it got perfected, we've been scaling it. And we're in 9 states, serving 1.3 million children every day. And so half the money comes from the government. And so out of the 100%, 50% comes from the government. The other 40% is raised right in India, and the other 10% is raised in the United States. And we're very fortunate to have a very broad base of supporters who are actually making it possible. Even though 1.3 million meals every day is impressive, the real problem is 120 million. And so we are now thinking as to how we can get to that 120 million. The most powerful way to change a democracy. If people know what's possible, they will not settle for anything less than that. And secondly, Akshay Patra is doing a lot of training to other people who implement the midday meal program, so that hopefully they can operate to the same level of standard and bring the same service to a lot of the other children. So what's exciting about programs like Akshay Patra is that they're not sort of doing something in a sideline and something. They're really trying to bring this innovation entrepreneurship to the whole system, so that the billions and billions of dollars that the government spends, that will embrace the innovation and really see an impact in a big way. This is something new. The world hasn't seen this before. Right. And I'm so pleased that everybody's cooperating, excited about it. It's still a long road. I mean, it may take 15-20 years before we get there, but it's exciting.
Desh, like always, thank you so much for being a continued inspiration for all of us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Martin. So great. Thank you.